his political agenda, as this delicate balancing act favored the pagans over the Christians. Firstly, Constantine enacted a series of laws to honor the Day of the Sun, or Sunday. Originally, Saturday had been the first day of the planetary week, Sunday the second. Constantine rearranged the order of the days by placing Sunday in the most important position as first day of the week and moving Saturday to the seventh day. Sunday exaltation was something on which some Christians had already compromised. By the 2nd century, many Christians, particularly in the Western Roman Empire, had come to revere Sunday as the day of the Savior's resurrection. This was the opening Constantine needed for uniting paganism and Christianity. The Sunday law of Constantine must not be overrated. He enjoined the observance, or rather forbade the public desecration of Sunday, not under the name of Sabbatum, Sabbath, or Dies Domini, Lord's Day, but under its old astrological and heathen title, Dies Solis, Sunday, familiar to all his subjects, so that the law was as applicable to the worshippers of Hercules, Apollo, and Mithras as to the Christians. There is no reference whatever in his law either to the fourth commandment or to the resurrection of Christ. Constantine made his Sunday law deliberately ambiguous. He wanted it to be acceptable to both pagans and Christians. How such a law would further the designs of Constantine, it is not difficult to discover. It would confer a special honor upon the festival of the Christian Church, and it would grant a slight boon to the pagans themselves. In fact, there is nothing in this edict which might not have been written by a pagan. The law does honor to the pagan deity whom Constantine had adopted as his special patron god, Apollo, or the sun. The very name of the day lent itself to this ambiguity. The term Sunday, Dies Solis, was in use among Christians as well as pagan. The 7-day planetary week became a vehicle for change. Both the 8-day Julian and the 7-day biblical were laid aside to introduce the planetary week. The planetary week came into being by the cunning vision of the emperor, and truth is, there is nothing of a biblical quality about it. The time was ripe for a reconciliation of state and church, each of which needed the other. It was a stroke of genius in Constantine to realize this and act upon it. He offered peace to the church, provided that she would recognize the state and support the imperial power. Constantine's Sunday law did reconcile pagans with many of the Christians. However, it inflamed a debate that had raged for over 100 years. When to celebrate the Savior's sacrificial death? Many Christians in the east of the empire at this time worshipped on the seventh-day Sabbath and kept the annual feasts of Yahweh, these calculated by the biblical calendar. Even those who embraced worship on Sunday used the biblical calendar to calculate Passover. Emotions ran high as religious people sought to worship properly in light of different calendars. Since the 2nd century AD, there had been a divergence of opinion about the date for celebrating the Paschal, Easter, anniversary of the Lord's Passion, death, burial, and resurrection. The most ancient practice appears to have been to observe the 14th, the Passover date, 15th and 16th days of the lunar month, regardless of the day of the Julian week these dates might fall on from year to year. The bishops of Rome, desirous of enhancing the observance of Sunday as a church festival, ruled that the annual celebration should always be held on the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday following the 14th day of the lunar month. This controversy lasted almost 2 centuries, until Constantine intervened in behalf of the Roman bishops and outlawed the other group. Eusebius of Caesarea admitted that the churches of Asia had long clung to observing Passover on Abib 14. The parishes of all Asia, as from an older tradition, held that the 14th day of the moon, on which day the Jews were commanded to sacrifice the lamb, should be observed as the feast of the Savior's Passover, whatever day of the Julian week it should happen to be. But it was not the custom of the churches in the rest of the world to end it at this time. The continuous weekly cycle of the Julian calendar meant that the biblical Passover on Abib 14 could fall on any day of the Julian week. Consequently, Abib 16, the day of the resurrection, did not always fall on Sunday. There was no argument as to whether the resurrection actually occurred, as all acknowledged it had taken place on Abib 16 of the lunisolar calendar. The question was, when do we celebrate it? Dates are established by calendars, so ultimately it was an argument over which calendar would be used to determine the celebration. To unify Christians and pagans, the observance of both the crucifixion and the resurrection must be transferred to the Julian solar calendar from the biblical lunisolar calendar. Constantine resolved this debate at the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. He decreed that Jewish computation using the lunisolar calendar should no longer be used for finding these dates. At the Council of Nicaea, the last thread was snapped which connected Christianity to its parent stock. The festival of Easter had up till now been celebrated for the most part at the same time as the Jewish Passover, and indeed upon the days calculated and fixed by the Sanhedrin in Judea for its celebration. But in future, its observance was to be rendered altogether independent of the Jewish calendar. For it is unbecoming beyond measure that on this holiest of festivals we should follow the customs of the Jews. Henceforward, let us have nothing in common with this odious people. Our Savior has shown us another path. It would indeed be absurd if the Jews were able to boast that we are not in a position to celebrate the Passover without the aid of their rules, calculations. These remarks are attributed to the Emperor Constantine, and became the guiding principle of the Church, which was now to decide the fate of the Jews. No longer would the Savior's sacrifice be observed on the 14th, 15th, and 16th days of Abib on the lunisolar calendar. In the future, such remembrances would be transferred to Easter Sunday of the Julian calendar, which can drift anywhere from March 22nd to April 25th. Constantine accomplished three things still in effect today. 1. He standardized the planetary week of 7 days, making Sunday the first day of the week. 2. He exalted Easter and guaranteed the true Passover and the pagan Easter would never fall on the same day. 3. He exalted Sunday as the day of worship for both pagans and Christians. The long-term effect was that Easter Sunday entered the Christian paradigm as the day of Christ's resurrection. The corollary to this realignment of time calculation was that the day preceding Easter Sunday, Saturday, became forever after the true Bible Sabbath. This is the true significance of Constantine's Sunday law, and it laid the foundation for the modern assumption that a continuous weekly cycle has always existed. Constantine's actions actually favored paganism. However, the corrupt bishops of Rome, desiring greater power, were able to present these actions as favorable to Christians. To conciliate the pagans to nominal Christianity, Rome, pursuing its usual policy, took measures to get the Christian and pagan festivals amalgamated, and by a complicated but skillful adjustment of the calendar, it was found no difficult matter, in general, to get paganism and Christianity, now far sunk in idolatry, to shake hands. Constantine's son, Constantius, took his father's act one step further and outlawed the use of the biblical calendar for Jews as well. It was no more possible under Constans to apply the old calendar. This also impacted apostolic Christians who still worshipped on the ancient Sabbath. Constantine was a pagan priest with a political agenda. Through a skillful adjustment of the calendar, he united pagans and Christians. The true Sabbath of the Creator was lost.